Hi, I'm Mary Greendale, and welcome to our annual series of interviews of candidates for local offices. The town election is May 24th. We have contests for Select Board, Finance Committee, Planning Board, and School Committee. I am interviewing all these candidates. I have prepared questions specific to each board or committee. Each candidate will respond to the same questions for that office. This allows voters the chance to compare the candidates' approaches and thinking according to the issue. These videos will run a maximum of 25 minutes and will be available on HCAT's website, on HCAT's YouTube channel, on our Facebook page. So let's get started. All right, so my next interview is with Cynthia Listewnik. I am having a terrible time with my tongue today. And Cynthia is running for re-election to the school committee. How long have you been on?
This is my 7th year.
Okay, so I'm going to start with the questions. Just tell us briefly about yourself and your family and maybe one little fun fact.
Okay, sure. So I moved here in 2010. I grew up in Needham, and my husband and I used to own a condo in Needham. And then when we had our surprise third child, we decided it was time for us to look for a home of our own. And we had driven back and forth on Route 16 out to visit Mark's family, who lives in Webster, all the time. And I said, you know, that little quaint little town with the blinking light, that's all they have downtown. You know, it's so cute. There's the Fisk General Store. Like, let's check this place out. And read some articles. I think it was even Lisa Koshin's article about the Montessori French and other program. I'm pretty sure that was her article that kind of led me to look more closely at Holliston for schools, because that's one of the most important things. With 3 kids, I wanted to make sure I was going to a nice school system, and that was close to my family, because my parents still live in Needham, and we're a very close-knit family, so we all wanted to be within a certain distance of each other. And so we found Holliston, and we live in the Queens neighborhood, and we're really happy with where we live, and I love my neighbors. And I think this is a community that really reminds me of what Needham was like when I grew up. And as I said yesterday in our other meeting, that, you know, the director of the DPW lived next door, and teachers lived next door. Like, teachers, you're accountable because teachers were right there with you. So I'm sorry, I'm rambling a little bit, but so, and then in terms of, like, my husband and I have been married for 24 years almost, and I have 3 kids, one who just graduated last year and is now attending Skidmore, and I have 2 boys that are in the French immersion program, and they love it. And what I do for work, I work part-time at the Congregational Church as the director of their youth and children's ministry. So that's what I do. And I have a very supportive husband as well.
Yeah. Anybody who's been in public office has to have a supportive partner.
Very much
so. Okay, so why did you choose to run for the school committee in particular?
So I was recruited by a current member of the school committee because I was attending meetings and asking a lot of questions and just felt like, where could I help? And you know, coming from a family who is very deeply committed to service, my mom for many, many years worked for the Needham Business Association and worked in the Council on Aging. In fact, spent 12 years helping to get their new senior center in town, so very much involved in that. And you know, I believe that public education is the cornerstone of our civil society, and I'm a strong advocate for public education. I was a public educated student myself in Needham, and frankly, I read Dr. Jackson had a newsletter that he sent out every year in the summer, and it talked about student engagement and parent engagement, and I just thought, like, if not me, then who? And if not now, then when? And so that's how I decided to run for school committee, and that was in 2015.
All right. So what do you think your skills and experience are that are helpful on the committee?
Well, as a clinical social worker, I come from a perspective of looking at things very holistically. So I try to look at as many angles as I can in terms of the impacts of a student's life and how we can improve their experience and help them to realize their best potential. So, and with that, I've been here for 7 years. I come now with some institutional knowledge. I mean, as anyone will tell you, that being on school committee, it is a very steep learning curve to learn about municipal finance and procedures and rules and collaboration with all of the many administrative and other town departments that you intersect with. And so that brings, I bring that experience of having to work with and building those trusting and respectful relationships that I think that I bring to the table to support that. And I don't pretend to have the answers to everything, but I absolutely will find out for you and get back to you whenever you need to. I'm very responsive to parents and administrators and all of their concerns, and I really appreciate their feedback because I think it helps to make us a stronger committee.
Okay. So what do you think are the two biggest issues facing the schools in Holliston in the next 3 years?
So I think if we take it from like the students' perspective, if you look at the trends from like we have the youth behavior risk survey that we do every year or every other year, and if you look at those trends, the mental health of our students is at a critical juncture, I think, right now. And I think coming out of the pandemic, it has been a significant issue for them. That our students don't have the schemas in our brain to say, what, life was different before. And they're resilient for sure. But I think that we need to be able to provide them the supports that they're going to need. And we talked about how like money is always going to be an issue, but I think offering them the supports that they need and addressing those mental health issues. I know that Mr. Vernay, who works as the Social, Emotional, and Learning and Equity Director, is working with different programs to bring into the schools to create a safe and supportive environment for our students. And we're also pursuing having interns. We have adjustment counselor interns, social work interns that can get the experience that they need for their master's program, but also be able to help to bridge the gap where we don't have funds to supply additional staffing for those students. So I think that's a huge issue for our students. I also think just recovering from the pandemic in terms of academically and trying to leverage some of our response to intervention blocks to make up for some of those deficits. And I think that in terms of not just math and reading, but also executive functioning skills and things like that, I think if we can leverage more of those, that time, and that's particularly in the younger grades, that will be extremely helpful for our students to move forward. Yeah, I guess I don't want to go more than, you said two, so I'm just going to say those two for now. I'll keep it. There's way more than two, but I'll keep it to those two.
I do want to probe a little bit on what you propose to address those issues, because I hear about the mental health issues and so forth, and there are limits to what a school system can do.
Right.
You can identify, you can provide support systems within the school, you can have special accommodations to allow a child to, but then you're kind of stuck after that.
And I do think then our partnerships with, say, the Youth and Family Services is extremely important too. And we certainly advocate for support for those positions too. I know that Jackie Weiner had proposed something to the ARPA steering committee to have some additional support through this year. Now I know some of those at some point will expire because ARPA is time limited, but having those additional supports outside of school, because you're right, we only have the in-school, but it's also helping to build that resilience. So I'm not saying that we can't do all of it. You're absolutely right, we can't. But I think that if we don't address the issues that our students have, how are they going to be able to progress academically? They won't.
Yeah.
So it's almost like the Maslow's hierarchy of needs in that regard.
So, you do have to do the foundation.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. In your review, is there anything we need to do better for the mainstream kid, the average student who might or might not want to go to college? The kid that is kind of sitting there just saying, "Ugh, are they getting what they need?"
Right. I'm not going to say that we don't do everything perfectly, for sure. There's always room for improvement. That's what we're supposed to be doing, is always striving for increasing our student outcomes. And I think that maybe looking at how we can leverage our block scheduling, particularly at the high school level, I think it makes it harder for us in terms of certain classes, like taking languages, for example. Like if you don't have a language, you have a year block in between having your first semester of a language and another year, that's too long. That distance is, if you don't use it, you lose it, right? So I think that's a concern that maybe we should take a look at in terms of maybe, is there any way that we can reevaluate that? I think there's certain classes that we don't have that we offer to kids. It's an elective, but things like personal finance, like that's an elective, but it's not something that we're teaching our kids as a 21st century learning skill. And I think that we should be. So, and maybe some of that is maybe even the limitations of the space, because our high school is 50 plus. It's as old as I am. So it's over 50 years old. And I think that may be holding us back, to be honest with you, a little bit.
How do you do, I mean, I wonder about things like computers.
Yeah.
You know, some kids have left because they want more computer education.
Yeah.
You know, things like
Well,
that.
I mean, if we actually look at it statistically, so if we look at how many students we have at Keefe Tech, for example, you know, Keefe Tech is an awesome, you know, opportunity for some kids to go to, and we have 71 kids in the district that are at Keefe Tech. And of them, if we assume maybe, you know, if we say 20 to 25% of them are going there for computers, it's still 16 or 17 kids, and we can't build a program at the high school for 16 or 17 kids. So although I agree with you, we actually have increased our offerings for computer science, and we have an actual designation for computer science. So I think that is something that we could work more towards. We have another program that was just launched, will just be launched this next year, on global citizenship. So I think that's an important, I think having more of those kind of, I don't know if it's a niche, but it's different program offerings, I think, that will support students. And I have to say that when we first started, and when I first moved here, I think we maybe had maybe 12 AP classes, and now we offer like 35. So we continue to offer more classes, but I think it's demand. Like if we had 15 or 20 kids that wanted to take that consistently, then we probably would offer it. Someone asked me before, they said, we used to teach Mandarin and we don't do that anymore. And I'm like, there wasn't a demand for that. And
well, we used to teach business. We used to teach a lot more in shop and woodworking and that kind of stuff, too.
And I think that's the limitations of this. Some of that's limitations of the space. I mean, when I look at, so we had the tiny house project that was going on. One of their major limitations was that they didn't have a bay that they could use that could open up. So they'd have to like create the thing indoors and then take it all apart and then put it back together again outside because they couldn't get it in and out. So some of the limitations of the space, I think, limit the creativity and some of the authentic learning experiences we want our students to have. So I'm really hoping, as we continue to move forward, to try to get a project with the Massachusetts School Building Authority, whether that is something that happens this next year or, I mean, it's a process, obviously, but to be invited into the process would be a boon for us, I think.
All right, so when you are faced with a choice between two very compelling needs, what's your thought process? What do you go through?
Right, so the way I look at it is what impacts the student's experience first. So it goes from the classroom all the way out. So if it's the difference between getting some support systems for a student in class, like either as paraprofessionals or actual, materials, so like whiteboards and things like that, that's where we focus our attention on and then move out from there. So we're very lean kind of administratively. So that's the focus, is to start from the classroom experience for a student and work out.
Well, that's pretty clear. That's pretty clear. I like that. I can understand that.
It's a pie. It's like or a bullseye in some ways, but that's how we look at it.
Okay.
Or at least that's how I look at it, I should say.
How much does public opinion influence that?
Well, I think parent engagement and parent feedback is extremely important. I mean, I feel like actually one of the great outcomes of the pandemic has been that we have better engagement than we used to having, and I have a sort of a love-hate relationship with Zoom. I hope I'm not alone in that. I think that it's really great for giving information. I think it's not as good for collaboration, especially when you get among larger groups of people, because then trying to keep track of all those dots is really hard. And reading facial expressions and trying to understand what the people's perspective. So I think that's been really helpful to get feedback from parents, and that's critical to our work. I mean, we serve the community, so we want to know what it is that they're looking for, and we try to do the best we can to follow through with that. That's not always the case.
Yeah.
So,
and you don't have that much control. I mean, really, the school committee doesn't have as much authority as
that is true. That is true, and there's some things that we legally have to do as well, and there's restrictions there. So.
Yep. All right. So the school committee decided to change the opening times for school, and I know that you were actively involved and on the board at that time. That decision has met with some pushback for persistently.
Yeah.
So I don't want to discuss the issue or whatever, but what is the best way to come to a meeting of the minds when there is that kind of disagreement and they're just stop?
Yeah, I have to say, I think when we made that decision, and I think that when we make those decisions, we want to hear what the impacts are. So this is really the first year that we've been able to fully roll out that change.
True.
So I mean, when we think about the pandemic, really interrupted all of that. So this is really the first year, and I think that our plan always was to say, let's see how that happened, what the impact has been, and are there ways that we can mitigate for any of the concerns that people have. We always intended to do that, and we still do intend to do that, because how are we supposed to know the impact unless we evaluate it at the end of that, and data is really important. So so that's one of the issues, and I think if we mitigate for some of those issues, and let me just take a step back. So when we first voted for the decision, or I should say the second time we voted for the decision, one of the issues that people presented to us, that their greatest concern was about childcare, and that there is so little childcare available for kids outside of extended day, which was almost at capacity at that point. So where were we going to find more childcare for students? And so at the time I said, well, let's see where we can engage other people. And I reached out to the YMCA, and they were gracious enough to start a conversation with us, and we actually created a program due to this change. And then, of course, the pandemic happened and everything kind of shut down. But I think in the wake of that, there are more options that have come in the wake of that. So like My Village, and now NGMA, the Next Generation Martial Arts, is starting another program. So I think that there has been some positive outcomes of that. But I'll circle back to your thing. So how do I come to meeting of the minds? I think we're accessible, and we want to talk with people about the decisions that we make. But I also have to recognize, as anybody that's in the position, and we're not going to make people 100% happy 100% of the time. And we are focused on what the positive aspects that we can have for our students, and it's really about them. And sometimes it's not going to shake out the way people want it to, but I hope in the end they can see that we are really focused on students.
Okay. All right. So the past few years have been exceptionally challenging, yes. Internally and externally. Now, I should remind folks that it's only been 2 years since you transitioned with the new superintendent.
Yeah,
so that
barely.
happened
Yes.
in the same mix
Yes.
of COVID.
Yes.
The superintendent leaves, new superintendent comes, and was an acting superintendent, and then became the full-time, the full superintendent.
Yeah.
So, speaking for yourself,
Yeah.
is there anything that you would like to do over and re-vote on and back up and look and say, oh my God, we could have gone that way? Or do you think, are you comfortable?
I think if we're talking about pandemic specific, I mean, if we want to get into the weeds around like the different things with the school start times, but I'll leave that.
Yeah.
But what I will say is, in terms of the pandemic, my focus the entire time was, how can I keep students in person, in school in person, and maximize their safety and their in-person learning. So anytime we were making a decision, it was with that lens. Will this decision create an atmosphere where our kids feel safe, supported, and are in-person learning, which we know is way better for our students than being remote learning? We know that. So that was the focus. So with that in mind, I really can't take back any of my votes. I really felt like every time that I was voting, that was the focus. I wanted to keep those students in the school, and I wanted to keep them safe. So.
And what did we do? Just remind me. The younger kids were in school the whole time.
Yeah, so we had, I mean, honestly, I think that our educators and our administrators did a phenomenal job of managing this, and I think that we were one of the few districts that were open through that time and had, K through 3 were in school the entire time, and no other district was doing that, none. And then even our older kids were doing a hybrid. And I have friends that were in Brookline that they didn't go to school in person until April of last year. So they were not even in school at all.
Okay, so for the kids that were the K through 3, okay, how was the health and safety aspect of that? I mean, that all worked out? It
did. I mean, I think that there was some back and forth about, do we need to keep them 3 feet away or 6 feet away? And I think that we were trying to measure all of that to see what made the most sense. And as we got more information, we adjusted. And that's what we continue to do. Is whenever we get more data to support, this is safe, this is something we can move forward with, then we did that.
Okay. So as a member of the school committee, and you already know this because you have been, you know that you have a sphere of influence. You know that you have an impact in the community. You're offering leadership. You know, it's just part of the role. So what are the policies and practices that you think need to be examined about inclusion, about diversity, about equity, all of those things that I know that you now have an official foot in the door with the person. Jamal, is that his last name?
Jerry Vernay. Yeah. Yes.
So, I mean, you have a foot in the door with that, but what else do you think we should be doing?
I think that we should embark on an equity audit, to be honest with you, because I think that getting an outsider's perspective, because I think we need to see where our blind spots are. I can certainly, from a policy perspective, I spent many years being on the policy subcommittee. In fact, this is the first year I haven't been on it since I was on the committee. I was trying to give some other members some opportunity to, because I think that's a really important role. And I think policies are, the cornerstone of what we do here. So really looking at the issues that we need to, because we don't always see where our policies might be failing or might be not supporting certain students. I'll try to give you an example. So I had someone come to me and say, they're a resident in town, but they can't seem to get registered to come to school here. And I was trying to understand why. And they said, well, they're living in someone else's home, so they don't have like a lease, and they don't have certain documentation. And it was more about our documentation was restrictive. And even though it wasn't, the procedures seemed to be. So it wasn't really allowing that person to be able to register for school, even though they clearly had, a landlord. They didn't, they were, all of their utilities and everything was all included. So they didn't have all of the different documents that they were looking for. And even though her paycheck was going to that address and all of those things, they weren't accepting the documents. So that was frustrating, and it was classist and, and maybe on borderline racist. And I feel like that was something we didn't even think about, that not everyone was going to have a purchase and sale agreement, because not everyone's buying a house that's moving here, or moving into town. So that was, I think, a little eye-opening for me to say, we have to make sure that these documents are inclusive and make sure that other things can be used in order for a student to register to be here. So that's just one example. So
an audit.
Yeah, so I think an equity audit would be incredibly helpful, I think, to have someone from the outside to come in to look. We already have some audits that our curriculum coordinators engaging in with the Department of Education. So it'll be interesting to see what they see as something that we need to in terms of changing our curriculum or realigning our curriculum in some way.
Interesting. All right, so this comes to the 2-minute point where you get to tell why people should vote to re-elect you to the school committee.
Well, I think I have some, I don't like to say unfinished business, but I think that I do. I have invested a great deal of time and energy and dedication to this community, and I want to continue serving in this capacity. I'm a strong advocate for children and their families, and I have spent a lot of time engaging with the other community members in terms of the other boards, and even with our state legislators to advocate for students. And I want to continue to do that on behalf of the community that I love.
All right, well, you didn't take a whole 2 minutes.
Sorry, I will.
But at any rate, is there any other last word you want to say?
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the offer.
All right, so Cynthia Listewnik, candidate for school committee, thank you for the interview.
Thank you for having me. Have a good day.
Thank you for watching Just Thinking. You've done your homework, so please remember to vote on May 24th. It's important for you, your family, and the community. Thank you.